Welcome to this explainer. When we think about the ancient Egyptian pyramids, it's honestly pretty easy to assume we already know the whole story. But beyond those iconic shapes lies this incredible, hidden history full of trial, error, ingenious physics, and startling cultural revivals. So, we're going to shatter everything you think you know and explore how the ancient world's most famous monuments actually came to be. Okay, let's dive into this. When you picture Egyptian pyramids, your mind probably jumps straight to a very specific image, right? Three pristine triangles sitting against a desert skyline. But look at that number, 118. That is the absolute minimum number of identified pyramids in Egypt alone. And there are likely many, many more still buried beneath the sands, appearing today as nothing more than mounds of rubble. We're all incredibly familiar with the famous Giza trio, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. They completely dominate pop culture. But here's the thing, they're just a tiny fraction of the story. The real history isn't isolated to just one single plateau. It actually spans these vast archaeological zones stretching across Abu Rawash, Abu Sir, Saqqara, and Dashur. These were massive, widespread fields that served as royal necropolises for centuries. So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. Beyond the Giza Plateau. 2. The evolution of pyramids. 3. Symbolism and the stars. 4. Engineering the impossible. And 5. The Kushite Pyramid revival. We are going to uncover the messy trial and error of building them, the deeply spiritual why, and the exact mechanics of the how. All right, Section 1. Beyond the Giza Plateau, let's look at the foundational purpose and placement of these incredible structures. While there are always a few outliers, the vast majority of these monuments were built specifically as tombs for pharaohs and their consorts during the Old and Middle Kingdom periods. And the geography here, it is absolutely crucial. Every single major pyramid was built exclusively on the west bank of the Nile River. Now, this wasn't just a coincidence, and it certainly wasn't just because it was prime real estate. In ancient Egyptian mythology, the West, the literal site of the setting sun, was intrinsically linked to the realm of the dead. So their placement was a deliberate, powerful theological statement right from day one. Moving on to Section 2, the evolution of pyramids. Because that perfect shape, it definitely didn't happen overnight. Let's move to when and see how this builds over time. Starting way back around 3150 BCE, elites were buried in simple rectangular bench-like structures called mastabas. But fast forward to 2670 BCE, and the builders for Pharaoh Djoser at Saqqara decided to stack those layers on top of a square mastaba. This created a step pyramid, essentially a gigantic stairway for the soul. Then, decades later, Sneferu tried to build the very first smooth-sided pyramid. The result was the famous bent pyramid, where they clearly realized they messed up the steep angle and had to change it mid-construction. Talk about a massive pivot. It actually wasn't until Khufu's Great Pyramid in 2589 BCE that the flawless geometric shape we all know was fully realized. It was a very human process of trial and error. And if you look closely at the data, there is a really clear peak and decline in scale here. We go from Djoser's 62 meters, climbing incredibly rapidly to the massive 146.7 meters of Khufu's Great Pyramid. But then, check out what happens by the Middle Kingdom. The Pyramid of Senusret II drops way back down to under 50 meters. As royal power fluctuated and the economy shifted over the centuries, that massive scale simply couldn't be sustained. Later builders even reverted to using mud brick cores instead of solid stone. Let's shift gears to Section 3, Symbolism and the Stars. What was the real motivation here? To understand the why, it actually starts with the language itself. The ancient Egyptian word for pyramid is mar, and graphically, in their hieroglyphs, this is directly linked to the benben. According to Egyptian creation myths, the benben was this primordial mound of existence that arose out of a watery abyss. So the shape of the pyramid itself represented this mound of creation, but it also brilliantly represented the descending rays of the sun. To really amplify this effect, most pyramids were originally faced with highly polished, brilliant white limestone. Imagine that! From a distance, they literally looked like glowing, solid beams of sunlight crashing into the earth. But we have to remember, they weren't just static symbols. They were active, functioning tools. A lot of scholars suggest pyramids were essentially designed as literal resurrection machines. Take the Great Pyramid, for instance. There are these incredibly narrow shafts extending from the main burial chamber straight out through the massive body of the structure. and they point directly to the dark area of the night sky where the stars appear to revolve. The Egyptians believed this specific spot was the physical gateway into the heavens. So the pyramid was basically a magical launch pad, a machine engineered to shoot the deceased pharaoh's soul directly into the physical abode of the gods. Which brings us to Section 4, Engineering the Impossible. The ultimate question: how did they actually do it? This is probably the most highly requested question in history. For centuries, people have speculated wildly about how human beings moved millions of tons of stone without modern machinery. But back in 2013, an absolutely groundbreaking discovery at an ancient harbor on the Red Sea coast answered a ton of those questions. Archaeologists found papyri known as the Diary of Merer. This is an actual daily logbook written over 4,500 years ago by an inspector named Merer. He meticulously documented exactly how highly organized teams of laborers transported massive blocks of white limestone from the Tura quarries using a complex system of Nile River barges and connected waterways right to the Giza Plateau. It completely humanizes the builders and definitively proves that organized waterways were the real backbone of Old Kingdom construction. And this brilliantly illustrates the physics of the whole operation. The on-the-ground mechanics were incredibly precise. Step 1, quarry the stone. Step 2, transport it via the Nile. Step 3 is where the real genius comes in, dragging these massive stones on wooden sleds over desert sand. By pouring exactly the right amount of water in front of the sled, the droplets created tiny bridges between the sand grains. This stiffened the path and actually reduced the pulling friction by up to 50%, halving the effort. Finally, Step 4 used water trenches as massive liquid levels to ensure the foundations were perfectly flat. It's just pure, elegant, ancient engineering. All right, let's look at Section 5, the Kushite Pyramid Revival. We're moving chronologically past the end of Egypt's Pyramid Age. So long after Egypt stopped building giant stone pyramids, a really surprising and massive resurgence occurred further south, down in what is present-day Sudan. After much of Egypt actually came under the rule of the Kingdom of Kush during the 25th dynasty, Kushite rulers like Piye and Taharqa resurrected the pyramid tradition centuries later. And they didn't just build a couple of them. During the Meroitic period, they constructed around 180 Egyptian-inspired but distinctly indigenous royal pyramid tombs. Think about that for a second. The Kingdom of Kush actually built more individual pyramids than the 118 we have identified in Egypt. It is just a breathtaking legacy of cultural inheritance. So, we've traced this incredible journey from simple mastabas all the way to towering resurrection machines, dragged across wetted sand and floated down the Nile, all the way to a massive revival in Sudan. I want to conclude by leaving you with this provocative question to chew on. If pyramids were simply tombs for dead kings, why do their architectural evolution, their stellar alignment, and their staggering engineering secrets continue to captivate us, easily outlasting the very empires